Welcome, everybody, inside the Parisi Palace, high above 2919 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show on KEVT, Power Talk 1210 AM. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today. My show revolves around the 4 L's: leadership, love, life, and lineage, and the ongoing story of real music made by real artists. In the annals of music history, a lot of good music has been made. And a lot of that music never saw broad popularity because it was not disseminated properly, if at all. The advent of freeform radio crystallized in the Bay Area in the middle 60s when Tom Donahue, Vaco, Sylvester Stewart, and my guests spearheaded a conscious effort to play local soul music. This flexibility within radio broadcasts allowed for these local bands to become immensely popular, with a culmination in the San Francisco Sound, Cold Blood, Tower of Power, Sly Stone, The Loading Zone, Quicksilver, The Grateful Dead, The Airplane, Marvin Holmes, and The Uptights, The Spiders, and everything else in between. My guest today has been promoting music and stretching ears for the last 50 years. She became friends with the musicians who made the music that she played on her nightly broadcasts. The regional commerce of the record-based industry allowed for a myriad of music to be ingested by individuals with larger palates and an appreciation for social consciousness movements. How about the Sons of Champlin into the Preservation Hall Jazz Band into Malo? How about Commander Cody into Swamp Dogg into Shanti? How about Jackson Sutter, the Avalon Ballroom, or the Matrix? Could have been John Lee Hooker into Boz Scaggs into Michael Bloomfield. The explosion and overlapping of blues, soul, jazz, and rock all blending together, and it was my guest's primary responsibility to play this music for her listeners. Because of her relationships with the players, they came into the studio to play, and they played benefit concerts, and they made history. It was about creating identities for great artists before full interconnection, when liner notes, pictures, and an album every 3 or 4 months helped brand these bands. Without individuals like my guest, a lot of bands I have mentioned probably would not have enjoyed the longevity and success they do today. She gave them exposure, which any artist desires, and this was exposure based on fine taste of incorporating world instruments in traditional music settings, helping to bring funk into the American lexicon, and advocating for multi-ethnic bi-gender configurations. She's still doing it today in the rigid corporate world of Sirius satellite radio. Dusty Street, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Whew, that was quite an introduction, my dear. Thank you so very much.
You're most welcome, and it's an honor to have you on the program.
Well, I was just recently, as of yesterday, inducted into the Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame, so I'm starting to feel a little bit of my oats as well.
Dusty, without jeopardizing your current position at Sirius Satellite Radio, can you talk about how restricted radio has become?
Oh, yeah, I care about what they think about as much as I care about a wart on my nose. What's happened to radio, it started happening back in the 90s. First of all, when the deregulation of radio came down the pike, it made things even worse. But it actually started late 70s, early 80s, although I was able to continue freeform of my own type well into the 80s. And it also, a lot of it had to do with the changing ears, as you so very eloquently put it, of the listening audience. Sirius is just a reflection of what's been going on since the 90s in radios. 15 to 2,000 song playlist. I was recently told, Dusty, we love your stories, but keep them to 30 seconds. Well. And I said, expletive, what do you mean 30 seconds? When was the last time you told a story in 30 seconds?
Right.
Oh, wait, you don't know how to tell a story, which is another reason I've had a lot of jobs. I don't take authority very well. But the computers came along, and as soon as programmers figured out that they could put the music into a computer and then have complete control over what the jocks played, rather than letting the jocks actually have a library of music with which to pick, let alone their own library from home with which to bring things into the station, that was the beginning of the end right there. As soon as we quit having control over the music, that's when everything changed. And it doesn't matter if your computer has 4,000 songs in it or 15 songs in it. If there's somebody other than the person on the air programming that music, they don't know what they're doing.
That's right.
They have no concept of the idea that a person, as you were talking about, can actually understand the link between somebody like a Michael Bloomfield and a jazz guitar player like Gabor Szabo and a more alternative person like, say, Hosier. You can put all those people together, and it works great because there is a lineage. But you have to know and love music in order to be able to connect those dots. And if you don't have a passion for the music, which I hate to say, I would say 99% of the new people on the air don't care. You know, they talk, they're there for their personalities. It's not about the music. The people on the air that still care are the people that have been doing it a really long time and had to care about the music, because you couldn't do a show unless you knew what you were doing. Again, it's if it's on the computer, you don't really have to know anything, and you can just look up online whatever it is that you need to talk about in that one little instance. And you never do actually feel the music or hear the evolution of it, or be able to sit down with the great people like the ones that I've been able to sit down with.
Can you just talk to the audience about any autonomy you still have left? I mean, you obviously have to truncate your stories. It doesn't even become a story, really. It's just some sort of soundbite. But do you have any autonomy at all anymore?
No. Honey, I can pick my nose quicker than I can pick a record on Sirius, I'll tell you that. But I do have an alternative, and that is I do a podcast, and I do it for free. Because I love what I do, and although I would like to get paid for it, I put it up on the internet on the flyingeyeradionetwork.com, and I've got about 75 shows up there. I had to stop for a little while due to health issues, but I'm going to be back swinging the bat again here in the next month or so. But that's I can't sit around and listen, because I keep up with all the new music. I didn't stop listening like so many people do after a certain point in their life. I've noticed that many people will go, well, there hasn't been any good music made since, and then you can pick the year that they either graduated from high school or college, whenever their quote-unquote best years were, and then they quit listening to any of the music after that. And I think that that's really kind of a shame. I think there's an awful lot of folks out there that would appreciate what's coming out if there was a delivery system that let them hear it. But let's face it, pretty much after you get into the workforce and you have a family, you're not going to be sitting at your computer going through Spotify or anything else to find new and interesting music. That's just not how you listened in the past, and that's not how you're going to listen now. If you don't have somebody that's doing that for you, like a disc jockey, then you're never going to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I mean, I was born in 1978, so I mean, I go back in time to chronicle when real music was made, and we have a game on this program called Name That Tune, Dusty. I wanted to play this track for you, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
Oh gosh.
And in 1960, maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6, somewhere, and maybe even before that, maybe even 64, I can't remember exactly what year, there was an FM station in San Francisco that was just sort of catch as catch can. Anybody could buy some time. So there was a Chinese hour, and there was a Filipino hour, and there was an hour of power, and there was another hour of this. People bought whatever time. And the midnight to 6 a.m. slot was empty. And there was a guy going to State College who decided that he could earn his way by buying that time. So he bought the midnight to 6 a.m. slot, and he would sell advertising and so forth, and he would play music while he studied. So he was playing, everybody was playing singles, or maybe an album cut, but that was about it. He played the whole album, and he was playing stuff that we'd never heard. He was playing stuff like was it Powerhouse with Clapton, the first band, and he was playing all this English stuff that we didn't know about, and some of the more obscure stuff from here. And he put on the album, and he played the whole side while he studied. And then sometimes he just flipped the side turner without even IDing. because it was the middle of the night, nobody cared.
But it wasn't Sly Stone. It was, who was it?
Oh no, this is before all of that. This was before the big.
Okay, so but what was this cat's name? Does he ever get recognition?
His name was. Oh wait a minute. It was Larry Miller. I think it was Larry Miller.
Okay, so Larry.
All right. I don't expect you to know who that voice is. That was the engineer Jim Stern.
Okay.
And what I'm getting at is, tell me where you were at when you heard Larry Miller.
I never heard Larry Miller. I didn't even know about KMPX. I'll tell you how I got into it. I was going to and by the way, Larry Miller never went to San Francisco State. He was working at the Anchor Steam Beer Brewing Company, and he got on the air doing. He was before Tom Donahue came in. He was on KMPX doing 6 to midnight. Doing midnight to 6, and I don't know if he bought his own time or if he sold it, or if he just did it for practically no money. But at any rate, when Tom came in, Tom was the one that really kind of took it over the top, because when we first got to KMPX, nobody could get the signal. FM was not in any cars yet. You could only get it if you happen to have one of those hi-fi stereo systems, and you really couldn't get it in very many parts of the city. I remember we would send out a blueprint of how to make your wire coat hanger into an antenna and attach it to the back of your hi-fi so you could get KMPX. But Larry was the one that taught me how to run a board, because I went in as an engineer. Now, the way I got into KMPX is there was this tall drink of water who was going to San Francisco State, and I was going to San Francisco State. His name was Milan Morel Melvin III. And Milan was a very tall gentleman with long black hair and a Fu Manchu mustache, and he rode a Harley. So, of course, I was in love.
Right.
And he had a acting class with me. I thought I was going to be an actress. But so I wound up going to Mexico for 8 or 9 months, and when I came back, I didn't want to go. I couldn't be a stewardess or a secretary, and that's pretty much the only thing that women in 1967 were able to do. And I wanted to do something, and I was at a friend's house, and I heard this KMPX radio station. I thought, wow, that's really cool. And I was sitting at Enrico's Coffee House in San Francisco, and I saw Milan walk by and went, Milan, how you doing? What's up? And he said, I've just started at this radio station as a salesman, and it's called KMPX. I went, oh, yeah, I heard that over at a buddy's house in the Haight. And he said, well, they're looking for female engineers. Why don't you come down and apply for a job? Which was really interesting, because I wasn't an engineer. I knew nothing about radio. And I didn't know an ohm from a watt, but I said, sure. So I went down, and Tom Donahue was sitting at his desk. I should say Tom was sitting around his desk. And I walked in and told him my name was Dusty Street, which it is. And he said, do you have a license? I said, oh, of course. I thought he meant a driver's license. Right. So I realized by the end of the conversation that he meant an FCC license. So I, leaving the building, saw a guy standing in a room with a whole bunch of equipment. And I thought, well, this guy probably knows what that is. So I went in and I said, what's a license and where do I get one? And he handed me a little booklet for Radio Shack and an FCC, preparatory book. So I went and I took the test and I got my license, and I went back and waited for Tom's phone call. And about 3 weeks later, he called and said, okay, you can start 6 a.m. to noon. Well, I was so terrible because I didn't know what I was doing. I'd never been in a radio studio before.
Sure.
And I just started pushing buttons and turning knobs and hoping. And the poor disc jockey on the other side of the glass from me threw his hands up in frustration and ordered me out of the building and told me never to return until I knew what I was doing. So I went that night to Larry Miller, who was doing what we call a combo operation. He ran his own board. And I sat in with him from midnight until 6 a.m., and he let me run the board, and he showed me what to do. And when the 6 a.m. jock came in, I was there, and the rest of it is history.
What an amazing story. Dusty, it's just such an honor to talk to you. And I have a treat in studio. My older daughter, Hannah, 10-year-old daughter, is in studio, and she's inspired by you as a female entrepreneur of sorts. She wanted to ask you a couple of questions.
Oh, I'd love it.
Go ahead, Ann.
Hi, Dusty. It's Hannah.
Hi, honey.
Hi. I have two-part question for you.
Okay.
One, were you the first female radio host in the Bay Area? And what changes occurred when you became established at this job? For instance, how
all right.
did people
Well,
treat
first
you?
of all, there was another female that was on the air before me, and actually she was a singer. Her name was Gail Garnett, and she had a song called We'll Sing in the Sunshine. It was kind of a one-hit wonder. But she was called Mother Coit. The difference between she and I is that all she was a voice, and she had one of those low, sexy, overnight voices of, "Hi, this is your Mother Coit," which I found kind of awful.
Mm-hmm, right.
But I was the very first female on FM radio, and I think maybe only the third in the country. I'm not sure. I think I was even before Allison Steele, because I started in April of 1967, but I've never actually done the research. I know that there were no other women on the air anywhere that I had ever heard. But, it's interesting because the people that I worked with at KMPX and then at KSAN we were such an inclusive kind of community, which is why we played all different kinds of music. I mean, we threw comedy and jazz and classical and just about anything into the mix if it worked. And I was also part of that inclusion. I got treated no differently than any of the guys, and I the only thing that ever happened that was a little bit different, I think, was when the women's lib movement decided that I was being insulted by being called Dusty Super Chick. They decided that the word chick was derogatory when talking about a female. So I sat down in the studio with them, and we did a half hour when I was at KSAN, and we did a half-hour show with them, and that changed their mind. But I wish it had changed things a little bit more than it actually did. Like I said, I was lucky. I was treated just like one of the guys.
That's great.
Thank you, Hannah. Dusty, I wanted to ask you about a little bit about your experience with psychedelics and the idea that you really came of age towards the tail end of the acid test. There was that explosion in the Summer of Love movement, which was really a catalyst from people invading from the outside. But I just wanted to know how much that expanded your consciousness, your appreciation for not just music, but for all sorts of different types of characters. I talked to a lot of the cats about the metaphysical. So I just kind of wanted to, I know you're not, well, I shouldn't say that. You're a great singer. I mean, you weren't a band member or a...
No, yeah. I'm not a singer. I've never been in a band.
I heard you sing.
You heard me sing. Well, maybe you heard me sing, but I've never sung on stage in my life.
Right. No, we got something queued up later for that. But no, I'm saying, I know you weren't a musician, but I wanted to get your...
No, I was not a musician. Let me jump in here, and I'll give you a little bit of background. Mm-hmm. Psychedelics had nothing to do with me. My mother and father had everything to do with it. I had an incredibly intelligent group of parents, and I call them a group of parents because my parents were divorced when I was very young, but they were both newspaper reporters and incredibly liberal people, very much ensconced in jazz. My mother at one point did PR work for Fats Waller, Art Tatum, and Duke Ellington in New York when she was working in New York. And I was always surrounded by lots of music and appreciation for music and all different kinds of people. My mother also shipped out as a Marine cooks and steward. So, we had people over to the house of every, straight, gay, Filipino, black, orange, green, you name it. And we had a potpourri of people that came in and out of my mother's house. And my father was a huge lover of music too, and like I said, a newspaper reporter, and then also he was the main negotiator for the AFL-CIO in Santa Clara County, and he helped organize Cesar Chavez's union. So before I even got into the whole, when I was in high school, I was already going down that road, and by the time I got to the Haight-Ashbury, I mean the mentality and the consciousness of the hippies was where my head was already. And I kind of diverged from my parents when I fell in love with rock and roll. My mother took me up to see my grandparents in Seattle when Elvis Presley first started to come out. And she told my grandmother, she said, now listen, I raised Dusty on good jazz, and I don't want her listening to any of this rock and roll stuff. And my grandmother blithely agreed. And when my mother went back to San Francisco and left me with Grandma said, come on down into the basement, honey. I've got some jam down there that I've put up, and it's time to bring it up. We went down into the basement, and she had one of those portable 45 record players, with a great big round thing in the middle, and every single that Elvis Presley had ever made. And she's down there going, you ain't nothing but a hound dog. And she's just carrying on. So I was able to flourish in my rock and roll glory back then in the mid-50s.
Let me ask you a question. But, I mean, there was still a lot of, burning jazz in that. Can you talk about some of that stealth jazz that was going on in the Haight? I know guys like, there was Flip Nunez and Jerry Grinelli and Fred Marshall, guys that were leaning on the rock, but also playing a lot of burning jazz. Lee Charlton was down there. Well, tell me about
Merle Saunders. Don't forget about Merle.
Merle played. Merle. So tell me about, because here's the thing, Merle could play some serious jazz. I want you to, the Fillmore District. Did you go down there for the 6 a.m. jam sessions? Because, to me, the whole thing doesn't seem real. The idea that you'd close a club at 2 and then reopen at 6, and then you'd have, it really gave people employment. But Merle, you want to talk about Merle's meaning to Haight-Ashbury? Because he was there before the invasion.
Well, yeah, and I mean, but, that's kind of what happened with an awful lot of those artists. I mean, when Michael Bloomfield, for instance, when Michael, first came to the Haight-Ashbury, and he heard the Jefferson Airplane and the Grateful Dead and Santana, he hated them. He thought they were horrible players, and he even said so. I mean, Michael used to sit in the back of my radio studio because Michael was one of those people that was up all night, and he would sit in the back of my radio studio. I'd be doing 10 at night till 2 in the morning, and he'd go into the library, or he'd bring stuff, and he'd just hand me records. He would never talk. He'd just hand me records, and I mean, he'd talk to me, but the minute the mic went on, the only thing he would ever say is, "Dusty Streets of Fox." But he would talk to me about the jazz music that he was listening to. We were big fans of Coltrane, and I love the fact that there's even a Church of Coltrane now, which is pretty outrageous. But most of the jazz that I got a chance to listen to was not necessarily live, but was mainly on record, with the exception of going to the jazz workshop. Now, I remember before I was 21, actually, probably about 13 or 14, being outside the jazz workshop and listening to all of the music. Because don't forget, man, I couldn't get into those clubs until I was 21.
That's right. No,
right. I started in radio when I was 19. So, I couldn't even get into the clubs, but I'd stand outside and I'd listen to them. And I remember when Tony Williams played with Miles Davis, and it was so cool because, Tony at that time was under 21, and they had to let us in because Tony was a drummer. So I got an opportunity to see Miles live, which was absolutely remarkable.
You want to talk about that? Can you talk about why that was remarkable?
Well, because first of all, here's this guy that's my age, playing with one of my icons, who is Miles Davis, and putting things down on the drums that you can hear a drummer. Or you can hear anything on record, and it can be recorded, perfectly, however it's meant to be. But live, when you hear somebody of Tony's expertise and the energy of the youth that he was at the time playing live, it was electric. It was like I had never heard real drumming before in my life, and it completely changed the way I heard. My second best experience about how I learned about music, is I was raised by two really remarkable disc jockeys, and that was Bobby Dale and Abe Vaco-Kesh. Abe Vaco-Kesh was a producer. Now, these guys came into my life the minute I went to KMPX, so I was 19, 20 years old when I first started hanging out with these guys. I was Vaco's engineer, and Vaco was kind enough to, when we went out on strike, to take me into the recording studio when he recorded people like, the Graham Bond Experience or Graham Bond Organization, and Harvey Mandel, which is just that in itself. Watching Harvey doing backwards guitar, like Jimi Hendrix had just before him,
right,
was totally mind-blowing. But Vaco he showed me how he could bring like Gene Jug Ammon's Caparangue and get Harvey to do it as a blues guitar player on the album, and how that process worked. So I was able to look and see that transition, and then hear how it evolved as it was being recorded in many different tracks.
That's one of the coolest things. I mean, I've done 500 interviews. I really like what you're telling me there. I mean, the idea that Pure Food and Drug Act with Paul Lagos and Victor Conti and Mandel and Randy Resnick, some fierce. But the blues guys were putting their accent on jazz, and I think that to me was, well, it was hypnotic. Dusty, I wanted to play this tune for you. To name that tune, and then we'll come back and talk about it, okay?
All right, honey.
Well, so you again, the music on the Jake Feinberg Show, sponsored in part by the Stereo Hospital, the Circle Tree Ranch, Dee's Island Grill, and we thank them for their support. I know you said you weren't a singer, but Cleo Dusty Street, take it away.
Dusty Cleo Street, right?
Dusty Cleo
I gotta
Street.
tell you, honey, that took a lot of hash before I got that right.
But I want to tell you, that album. The Soul of the Bay, for somebody who's in my generation and younger, it's essential. I mean, Fadil Shaheen, Sylvester, and the Hot Band. You had Enrico. I mean, listen, those guys, Shreve, Garibaldi, and Enrico, out of all the cats, I mean, I've interviewed the most Afrocentric jazzers on the East Coast and the West. I mean, I've done it all.
Well, Garibaldi and Shreve are just hombres to be reckoned with.
I just want to tell you, though,
those guys are monsters.
I just want to finish my thought is that they have put me on their back and said, we believe in Jake Feinberg. We love what he's doing. And for you to have that kind of access to choose those tracks, to have them, I mean, to see them in their prime, just take it away, Cleo, because you were just cooking on that.
Well, this is one of the things that happened with this album. Originally, what Vaco wanted to do is he wanted to do an album called Blues for Bugs. He wanted to have all these great players do various songs and then get Mel Blanc to come in, and the vocals would be in various Looney Tune cartoon characters. There would be a Sylvester, and there would be a Bugs Bunny, and a Foghorn Leghorn, and so on and so forth. Well, when that didn't work out, he decided to do the blues of the Bay, or the music of the Bay, and he knew of a couple of people, but I turned him on to Sylvester. He had never heard Sylvester, and I had been going down and watching the Cockettes, and I loved Sylvester and Sylvester's voice. So I was friends with the Pointer Sisters. I tried to put the Pointer Sisters behind Esther Phillips once. That almost didn't work. So I knew the Pointers.
It's a great idea.
I was in the studio. We were doing, I think, Dan Hicks, and I ran into Neil Sean, and I, said, "Hey, man, you want to come down and do a guitar part here?" And then, of course, I fell in love with the Tower of Power the minute I heard "You're Still a Young Man, Baby" as a demo before the album came out. And the Tower can tell you, I used to be their #1 fan, and played them constantly. So it was really great to bring all of these people together to play with Vaco on this amazing album, and it was just because of I guess one of the things that I really miss is when a band is new, like when the Tower was new, and they needed a leg up. I was able to do that for them, as I have for lots of other bands, and it breaks my heart right now that you can't really do that anymore. But at any rate, getting back to Lights
Dusty,
Out.
hold on. Dusty, I want to ask you something.
Vaco said, we've got this song, Junior Walker's Cleo's back. And he cut the track. And with me in the studio, and I'm sitting there and I'm going, oh, this is really cool, listening to him record with all of these amazing people. And he said, but we need somebody to do the voice of Cleo's back. And he kind of turned around and looked at me, and I said, okay. And so I went into the studio, and I did it, and he didn't like it, so he brought me back into the booth, and he gave me a hit of hash, and then he put me back out in the studio, and I did it again. He didn't like that one, so by the time I actually got the track that he actually liked, the take that he actually liked, I was completely cross-eyed and painless. They had to drive me home.
Can you? I want you to go back, because I just want you to be as specific as possible. Like you talked about even today. I mean, I will admit, there's a lot of great music out there, and there's just a supply and demand thing, and we're awash with YouTube. But when you talk about giving a band a leg up, what did you do specifically that meant leg up?
Well, the only thing that I can recognize, and I certainly didn't do it consciously, you have to remember that whenever I put an album on the air, it was because I loved the music and I wanted to share the music with my listeners because I thought that they would like it. I never sold my listenership short. I knew that no matter what I brought to them, that they would dig it. And that's been true for my entire career. And what happens, and I had no idea when this first started, the power of radio turns out to not just be with your listeners, but your listeners in turn are the ones that start demanding the music, and by demanding the music, that gets to record company people, and their name starts being talked about, and their gigs start getting more and more people in them, and all of a sudden record executives are paying more attention to them, or getting them to record. Or if they've already gotten an album, you're starting to show that you can get these people played in more places than just one. Because one of the things that was so cool about San Francisco in that day and age is that people would record off the radio, and then they would send the tapes to their friends. I mean, people heard me in London and in Guam and in Hawaii and Mexico. I ran into a guy probably late 70s who said that he used to listen to me when he was in London, and he was working on pirate radio at the time. So I think that's what I meant by giving them a leg up. It's the exposure, not to, not the kind of exposure that they get now, where you have music shoved down your throat by hearing the same one song off of an album over and over and over. But by playing all kinds of different tracks off the album and giving the public an overall idea of what the band is capable of, and that's missing sorely.
Well, also that's perfectly said, because a lot of the bands, what was so scintillating, you had so many bands that came out of that regional scene that turned into, huge, internationally acclaimed bands. And, and to me, I'm not even sure if you were aware of it at the time, that kind of impact that you were having, because it was really just being played, out of these, KMPX or KSAN or all these stations. But I wanted to ask you about the when you would do a 6 a.m. to noon run, would you play? How many commercial breaks were there? How many songs were you allowed to? Could you play in a row? And what was some of the were you doing? Like I was talking about, where you had all the smoking blues. It was the overlap. All these white kids wanted to play with like the old black guys. So you had, John Lee Hooker. Can you give me a Dusty Street sort of 1 hour free form in the heyday set list?
Okay, well, gosh, I wish I'd known, because you know what? I actually have my playlists. I'm one of those geeks that actually kept all of my playlists from the time I was at KMPX2 all the way up until computers came along.
You should have been ready.
And I'm not really sure. I might even have one handy.
It's all right.
But this is the deal. Now, 6 a.m. to noon was only as an engineer. I would never do 6 a.m. to anything. I was not that kind of a girl. But I was on the air from 10 at night till 2 in the morning at KSAN. And oh my, look at that. I opened up the drawer to 1974.
Oh, wow. Great year.
All right, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, here, let's sit down under the
light. Yep.
Under the light here, and let me read off. This is a playlist that I had. Good grief. All right. We've got George McRae, Rock Your Baby, Ann Peoples, I Can't Stand the Rain, Ian Matthews, Seven Bridges Road, Roy Buchanan, the Messiah Will Come. I can't even read my own handwriting. Carolyn Sullivan, Dead. King Curtis, Soul Serenade. Etta James, I Found a Love. Bob and Earl, Harlem Shuffle. Jimmy McGriff with Criss Cross. The Red, White, and Blue Band. Vaco the Great Man. Van Morrison, I Will Be There. Billy Preston, How Long Has the Train Been Gone? Louis Jordan, Beware. The Pointer Sisters, Little Pony, the Allman Brothers, in memory of Elizabeth Reed, Carla Thomas, Sugar, and Solomon Burke, Midnight and You.
And that was okay. That you just made my year by far. I mean, that to me that's 10 a.m. That's 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Did you say?
Yeah, 10 to 2. And this says page 2, so that meant that it was probably about between 11 and 11:30.
So, you just read off an amalgamation. I mean, just such beautiful southern sort of Gulf Coast soul and folk blues, a little bit of jazz, and I mean, were there how much free? I mean, literally, how much airtime did you get? I mean, I get two.
Well, that's one of the brilliant things about Tom Donahue, is that because he was an AM jock, he did not want us to be inundated with commercials. Right now they've got 20 commercial minutes an hour. And that means that they have, and they only break twice. So you're getting 10 commercial minutes every 40 minutes or every 30 minutes or something like that. Right. At any rate, 20, and Tom said we would do no more than 5 minutes worth of commercials, and we would only do it 3 times an hour. So 5, 10, 15 minutes out of every hour. So we were getting 45 minutes worth of music in.
And okay, so you go, let's just say Rock Me Baby into Ann Peebles and Roy Buchanan. Let's just say that was 3 songs in a row. When you would play the title track of McRae, you'd take the vinyl off and then talk a little. Would you be the one man band and put on the next track? I mean, how would you?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I that's one of the things that people were so amazed watching me run a board is because I could every song ignited another song in my head, and I would be listening. I had 2 turntables. And I would have one turntable going, and I'd think halfway through the song, or even maybe, I was known to segue after 30 seconds left in the song that was on the air. There would be 30 seconds left, and I'd go, oh, no, wait, I want to play something else. And I'd grab a record, and I'd throw it on, and I'd cue it up, and I'd throw it on the air as a perfect segue in 30 seconds. So it was probably the hardest work I've ever done in my life, and the most satisfying. I was absolutely exhausted after a 4-hour shift because I was so into what I was doing.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. This is, and how many years would you say you were in that pocket for?
Well, actually, I'm always in that. I was in that pocket until they started not letting me pick the music.
Right.
And the thing is that I still do that. When I do my podcast, I work out of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the one thing that I love most about that studio is that there's 2 Technique turntables there. And of course, nobody uses them except me for my podcast. So I go in there, and I've got all of my CDs, and I bring in some of my vinyl, and I've got, 3 CD players going and 2 turntables, and,
I love it.
And it's like riding a bike, and I probably, one of the reasons I am an ex is because I once told my ex-husband, doing my show is better than sex.
Well, we have young people in here. It's beautiful. Well said, Dusty. I wanted to. I got another name that voice for you. This might be someone you've crossed paths with. Let's take a listen, and we'll come back.
Can I Dedicate was written because back in the day on those soul stations they used to have the dedication line on KDIA and KSOL. So they say the dedication lines are now open. So then people would call on the phone and say, I want to dedicate to my girlfriend so-and-so and want to dedicate this song. And then they would play that song, which was such a cool thing. And whenever they opened up the dedication lines, like on KDIA, they always had like a funky instrumental in the background. And there were all these Oakland horn bands, these African-American bands, like... what was the name of that? I can't remember the name of that group now. Marvin Holmes and the Uptights.
Wow.
That was one.
Yeah.
They had a tune called Ooh Ooh the Dragon. And they were just super funky bands, man, and they would play an instrumental sort of behind the dedication line. So they'd say, okay, the dedication lines are open. There'd be some funky instrumental playing there. So that's why I wrote Can I Dedicate? Because my dream was that Sunday.
Can you peg that voice?
No, I can't.
Okay, that was Can I Dedicate? You know that song from the Loading Zone. That was Paul Farso. From the
okay. All right. Very cool.
Yeah, and
I haven't thought about that band in a long time.
Well, Dusty. This is why but I wanted to. I'm curious about. I know that they weren't your. He wasn't talking about your station in particular, but how often did the cats like Linda Tillery and those kinds of bands actually come in and play during your show?
Well, I never got anybody to actually come in and play during my show just because we weren't set up for it in the radio station. I mean, our booth was the size of a postage stamp. However, these bands did play live on KSAN at the record plant, and a lot of those were aired during my time slot. And so that was very cool because we got to do, and Tom Donahue did a lot of those. We were able to do live from the record plant. So not only did we have these bands playing live on the radio, but we had the perfect situation because they were in a actual recording studio, and so there were Class A recordings made of these people playing live. I remember once I got Stanley Turrentine to bring his saxophone in, and I said, can't you just play a few riffs, and we'll put it on one of my IDs, and he just looked at me as if I was crazy. He said, well, I need other musicians, and I felt very humble. I thought, really, you can't just rip off a few notes, but I didn't say that.
But
I got to tell you something really quickly when you're talking about can I dedicate to KDIA? Because I was really good friends with Johnny D. Morris, and I loved all the music that were being played on KDIA and KSOL. And I would get, for instance, I played Milt Buckner's Mighty Low, and all of a sudden my hotline rings, and it's Johnny D. Morris. And he's listening to me because he's on the air at the same time, but he's listening to me on a radio while he's playing his records. And he says, what was that you just played, Dusty?
Now, I was going to say, I was going back and listening to my interview with Bill Champlin, and then obviously with Paul Farso, and they were mentioning these other stations that you weren't necessarily employed by, but I had a feeling that there was a real familial vibe within that. Everybody was supporting each other. You talked about running into Neil Schoen in the studio. And I think that's what lent itself to it too, is just the accessibility that everybody was around, and you could pull somebody in and do something, and you could do this and you could do that. And I wonder, Dusty, about if you could just talk a little bit about a couple of the positive things that you see within the radio paradigm outside of the idea of having your podcast. I mean, what are some things that are available now to younger people, younger bands that are trying to stay together? That was the thing. The bands were able to stay together, and they were able to cultivate that spiritual sound. Point us towards the light a little bit.
Wow. I wish I had a way to point you towards the light. I mean, my biggest hope is that we get the internet in cars. Because if we can get the internet in cars, then people can do live radio shows once again and do live broadcasts, because everybody's getting everything on their iPhones or, whatever device they happen to have. And if you can get Wi-Fi in your car, then that will give an accessibility to people, because it's not young people that need to find out, what's going on. They're already connected. They're locked in. It's people that are in the workforce, that already have families, that maybe are anywhere between the ages of 30 and my age, which is surely, we won't talk about that. Too old to talk about. But right. I think that's probably going to really change the way things are. I had great hopes for satellite radio, and those hopes have been dashed.
Wow. That's very disheartening.
Satellite started out to be really cool, and then, all of a sudden, the corporate people came in and started deciding that, okay, well, we have to do, the same thing that Clear Channel is doing. And unfortunately, the only people that they've hired in positions of power are people from Clear Channel and Cumulus. So the same mentality is reigning in satellite radio as was in terrestrial radio. And unfortunately, with satellite, it took FM radio 15 years to go down the toilet. It took satellite radio 5. So I don't have any hope in that regard. But I do have hope in terms of venues opening up. There's an awful lot of, I live in Cleveland at the moment, and there are a lot of places for people to play live. And again, I think if we're going to support and get folks to, as you say, stay together, but to get more folks interested in music that isn't on iHeartRadio, I call it iFart Radio. Mm-hmm. I bet that made your 9-year-old giggle. But it's just lousy. But then you've got these great venues. So if we can get people into the clubs and anybody listening, take a look at some of the clubs in your area and see who's playing. And if there's a band you've never heard before, try to find them online on YouTube or whatever. But if you can't, that's fine. Just go and take a listen. Take a chance, because 9 times out of 10 you're going to be pleasantly surprised.
One final question for you. Could you tell me if you had any good stories about Mickey Hart and Billy Kreutzmann?
Well, I don't know Mickey very well, but Billy I know very well.
Please tell me a good story about Billy.
I met Billy, I was, believe it or not, I was best friends with Pigpen when I was in high school in Palo Alto.
I can believe it.
And Pigpen was the one who turned me on to an awful lot of music that I later brought with me to the job that I do, because Pigpen's dad was an Alameda soul and gospel disc jockey. They did not know that he was white, and he just, he introduced me to the Swan Silvertones and the Mighty Clouds of Joy, and Sister Rosetta Thorpe, and all of these great bands, as well as like the Righteous Brothers Righteous Brothers and James Brown live at the Apollo, which he gave me for, I believe, my 16th or 17th birthday, and so I was very tight with him. So when all the Dead moved into a house in the Haight-Ashbury, I was living on Waller Street, and they were living around the corner on Ashbury Street. So I would go to visit Pigpen, and that's how I got to know all of the musicians that wound up being the Grateful Dead. Wow. Now, Bill actually was kind of the straight man of all of them at that time.
Wow.
But the one thing about that house is that everybody brought their own musical taste into it. I mean, if you, like in the back bedroom, you'd hear Pig playing blues records. Upstairs, you'd hear bluegrass, where Garcia's room was. You'd hear another kind of music, maybe even classical, coming from Phil Lesch's room.
Right.
And I mean, that whole house was just a potpourri of every kind of music that there possibly was. And like Billy would bring in, whatever his stuff was. I think one of the interesting things about Bill and Mickey was the fact that, even though there are 2 drummers in the Allman Brothers, but that was the first time that a San Francisco band had really embraced that kind of 2-drummer thing. And I think that really filled out the sound of the Grateful Dead. And I think it gave them an opportunity to expand musically themselves. Because, it's like Bloomfield said, man, they weren't all that great at the beginning. They really weren't.
Well, when the band formed, really only half of the guys were actual musicians, But the thing is that the Allman's double drummers, they used it very differently than the Dead.
Absolutely, yeah. No, there's no comparison, except in the fact that it expands the sound.
That's wrong.
It really gives that whole rhythm section a much, I hate to use the term because it is Phil Spector's, but it does give it a nice floor of sound, if not a wall of sound.
Well, yeah, some people refer to it as like almost Mickey bringing a tribal sense with Billy with this, black man shuffle kind of thing. But it's just, Dusty, I just wanted to, before I let you go, I wanted you to part of my show is predicated on love, and I wanted you to talk about your concept of love and how you continue to bring love to people every day. Oh,
isn't that a wonderful thing? And thank you for saying that.
Sure.
It's just that positive outlook. It's the glass is half full. As long as you can bring something positive. One of the things that I do on my radio show is I do a quote of the day. And sometimes, most of the time it's funny, and sometimes it's just kind of inspirational. But whatever it is, it's always towards the end of the show, and I always try to give some kind of positive vibe out in each one of those. But the whole concept of being able to understand and of tolerance, of empathy, When I walk by a homeless person, I don't shuffle by with my eyes averted. I stop and I say, hi, how are you doing? If you see somebody in trouble, because if you've got that love in your heart, that's what you bring to the table when you walk in a room. So it's just keeping that, the one thing that I've always believed in. I'm not a big believer in organized religion, but I do believe in the inherent goodness of mankind. Mm-hmm. And if you believe that you have inherent goodness in you, then I think that that's what you will bring wherever you go.
Well, Dusty Street, I must tell you, this hour just flew by, and I hope to do another segment with you down the road. Please friend me on Facebook, because I'll be transcribing your quotes. And I'm glad Michael Garibaldi still thinks you live in Seattle, so you make sure that you correct him on that.
Garibaldi's got me confused with Michael. I never lived in Seattle. I went to L.A., Garibaldi.
All right. Well, listen, Dusty, keep it up. We'll be in touch.
Those guys.
Yeah, I know. I do too. We'll be in touch, Dusty. Thank you so much.
Oh, honey, thank you so much, and I'm glad you do what you do. It's brilliant.
Thank you, my friend.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. It's the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you all in a little bit.